Hi everyone, welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thanks. Nice to have you with us on this 15th talk of the year. 12 months, 15 talks. Um, it's our last one of the year, and I hope uh, you all have you're all ready for a break of some kind or some kind of I don't know what to call it, reflective moment. Um, we are going to start momentarily, but welcome. Nice to have you all here. This is the last one, so maybe you should put your cameras on.
That would be nice.
Nice to see your faces.
Well, maybe after 14 sessions, people are sick and tired of my face. So maybe, or I've been worn out so much that, it might be better to show a picture of me from earlier generations.
Nice to see you, Nicola.
Thanks, Tamsin.
I know we have. That's okay, Susie. We know it's early for you, and sorry about the earlier start. Jerry, I will keep letting people in.
Okay. Okay. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. You will notice that we don't have Albie around the table yet. He is late arriving where he was going to land. So he's going to join us around 15 minutes from now. Um, Talk about flying with the seat of your pants. We are going to, however, proceed, and I'll start essentially by asking Naila to begin the conversation. We've basically agreed that we're not going to talk for a long time. My job is essentially to be the policeman, and that's all I am, a traffic cop. I also am allergic to high-flying introductions. I don't think you need more than a basic introduction to three of the most, uh, I think, impactful, honest, thoughtful people I know. And so I think this is going to be a great conversation. People who do not mince their words, who tell the truth, speak truth to power. And I think talking about a topic that really matters to us. So that's enough from me. I'm not going to introduce Naila. She can choose to present herself any way she likes. Naila, over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Hi, everyone. Um, how do I introduce myself? I'm Naila Farouky. I am half Egyptian, half Palestinian. I serve as the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum, which is um, a membership-based network of donors and foundations and funders and other philanthropy actors that work across the philanthropy sector across the Arab region. Um, I mean, I'm very honored to be here today, and I'm, very grateful for the space that Tamsin and Jerry have created and kind of allowed for us to have these conversations over the last year. Um, and you know, excited and a little bit nervous about today's conversation only because it's about topics that are a bit raw and maybe kind of render us a little bit vulnerable. And I was at dinner last night with friends, all of whom are actually today here, so they'll uh, they'll remember this conversation. But we were talking about today and what the topic of today's conversation was going to be. And I think we were kind of reflecting a little bit on what we would talk about, what Halim and I would kind of bring to this conversation, then also what Albie will bring to this conversation, which I'm very, very curious to hear. But when we were reflecting on the issues around anger and rage and resilience, and I was saying one of the things that I think has been very interesting to me, especially over the last 2 years, um, throughout the course of this genocide in Gaza, is that I started to have some discomfort maybe around using the term resilience to describe Palestinians and to describe the Palestinian experience, only because at some point it started to feel like maybe it was a bit of a romanticized notion um, of what it means to kind of survive and continue to hopefully thrive, or try to thrive. And part of that reflection is, I guess it kind of brings back what it means to be Palestinian in this moment, or to come from kind of that background. um and I was remembering, I don't ever remember a time in my life where I haven't been kind of aware of what it has meant to carry that in my being, in my um in my history, from my family, and it's very interesting that I was remembering a few days ago, again, kind of like reflecting on this conversation. So it's my Palestinian side comes from my father, and I remember very, very, very vividly my grandparents, both my Palestinian grandparents, having very definitive and kind of distinct impressions and memories and recollections about what it meant for them. So, my grandparents were 1948 Nakba survivors who left from, Palestine to first Syria, and then from Syria to Saudi, and then from Saudi to Rome. I mean, they went all over the place, landing in Egypt, and then eventually ended up in Jordan. And so they had my grandparents were, very angry, particularly my grandmother, who was like feisty, also happened to be half German, which is just, again, also a little bit interesting. Um, so she was this, really, really, really owned kind of her rage and her anger, and it was very explicit. And she was very clear about what she was angry about, who she was angry at, and what it kind of meant for everything that she had built. Whereas my grandfather, who joined the UN very shortly after it was established, was a lot, maybe, I guess, what I would have perceived at the time, not as moved. Um, and in retrospect now as an adult, I probably imagined that it wasn't that he wasn't moved, but maybe that he was more accepting and kind of like, okay, this is the reality of where we live, and this is what we have to do to survive. And then my father, who didn't own his Palestinian identity at all, was just very like, look, I left when I was 6 months old or a year old. And he's like, I have no identity to it. I have no affinity to it. And I'm Egyptian. And he spoke with an Egyptian accent. Um, my dad also would slip into a British accent, which was very odd. But he was not necessarily. And then there was me, who, at 12 or 13, I remember in Egypt, we used to live right across the street from what was then the Israeli ambassador's residence. I mean, you know, interesting. And I remember um, the security guards of the residence, it eventually ended up having to come over to our house and talk to my parents, and be like, you need to keep your kid in check. Like, she's going to get herself in trouble. Because I was, invincible, just running around, and like I would run past the residents and scream out, um, resistance, things about resistance, and long live Palestine, and with my kufaya and whatever. And at one point, it was the Egyptian guards who came and were like, "Listen, we're not going to shoot her, but the other ones may not be so friendly." And I remember very, very clearly. I think this might have been the first time that kind of resistance was validated for me, or allowed and kind of given agency, which is another one of the themes of today's conversation, where my dad didn't say, you need to stop. He was just like, that's my girl. Like, yeah, you do that. You do that. And then he said, but maybe not in front of the residents of the Israeli ambassador. Um, and so I imagine, like, as I was kind of thinking through about what to talk about today, that must have been the genesis of all of this for me, right? Is that there was this kind of validation of this is an acceptable form of expression, And then it really hasn't stopped since. It's ebbed and flowed for various different reasons. I moved to New York in my 20s, and it was a little bit more difficult to be as clear and to be as explicit. And then now, kind of coming into my 50s, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm clear and I'm explicit. So that's kind of the scene setting reflection for
That's
me. Thank you,
amazing. Thank
Jerry.
you. Thank you. Thank you for doing it in such a personal and fantastic way. Thank you, Naila. So the reason that Naila and Halima and Albie are going to be speaking today, and Albie has just joined us. It's great to see you, Albie.
We can't hear you
Okay,
yet.
well, I'll talk to him in a minute. Get yourself
Okay.
settled. Don't worry.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
the idea is really that Naila was speaking and Albie heard her conversation or watched the recording and got essentially moved by it, but also felt that it was a useful conversation to have. And Albie has been actually one of the first people we had a conversation with many years ago now. And so we thought this would be a very useful thing to do, which is why I think it's good that Halima started. That Naila started. I now will turn to Halima. Halima is a very old friend. We worked together for many years and is a close friend. So I won't try and introduce her. I'll let her introduce herself. Go ahead, Halima.
Thank you, Jerry. What Jerry won't say is that he was my first boss ever, and I would trail around after him, trying to get snippets of wisdom. So really, it's such a privilege to be here, Jerry. Thank you to you and Tamsin for inviting us, and just to be in this conversation with Albie and Naila. Naila, you're a hard act to follow. So my name is Halima Mohammed. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was born here. I've lived here all my life. I grew up in the time of apartheid, and came of age just at the time when apartheid almost ended. So I turned 17 when we had our first democratic elections, and remember being the most upset that I couldn't go to vote. That was my biggest bugbear of the elections, that I couldn't be out there voting. We did other things, but I couldn't vote. And I was saying to with Naila and on another call that we were having around this issue that we grew up in South Africa with the freedom of Palestine and the freedom of South Africa being so interlinked. And my first ever march, when I could go to one, was a Palestine march, right? So, and so this is something that is both personal, it's a matter, it's my politics, but it's also who I am, but it's also part of what we grew up with. It's what we thought liberation needed to look like, right? And so whenever we thought about the liberation of South Africa, we thought about, well, what does this mean to think about the liberation of Palestine? And there's always been the sense of incompleteness. And we have many problems in South Africa. We're liberated in some senses, but in many senses we're not. And so it almost makes us look at the issue of Palestine with a different lens. Like when you're talking about liberation, what do you really mean? And what are the kinds of concessions and compromises that we need to learn from our own mistakes when we think about what's happening in Palestine? And it's not for us to determine, right? As somebody outside of Palestine, it's simply not for us to determine. But when we hear the different kinds of perspectives being outlined by people from Palestine, to be able to give space for the range of opinions that are not the norm, for the range of perspectives that are not the comfortable ones to deal with, for the range of perspectives that come out of anger and rage, and to understand why it's there, I think has been a really, really important lesson for me as a South African when we think about what does solidarity look like for Palestine. And I'll stop there because we can go into more conversation later. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Albie, welcome. It's so good to have
Yes.
you we started with Naila, and then Halima has introduced herself. I have not introduced any of the speakers, and frankly, I'm too embarrassed to try and introduce you. I wouldn't know where to start and where to end. So I'm going to let you choose what you choose to reveal about yourself. You're a great secret. Nobody knows who you are. So you need to explain who you are, okay? And then maybe you want to address some of the things. Naila talked a lot about her youth and how her first memories of being a Palestinian and living opposite the Egyptian embassy in Cairo. And I
Visible.
think, and then it was a beautiful introduction to herself. And then, yeah, I think you've heard Halima's introduction. So over to you, Albie. And forgive me for not sort of giving you all the, all the paraphernalia that you're usually introduced with.
Usually the story is Albie Sachs needs no introduction, and then they read 20 minutes from Google. So I'm thanking you for not introducing me. But I was born into a political family. I was born into struggle. I turned my back on struggle in a way. I didn't want to automatically follow my parents' footsteps. And only at my second year at university, I was age 17, I met a young crowd with the same revolutionary values, and I was ready and joined the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign, became very involved for some years in the underground Communist Party, and then supporting the ANC and eventually joining the ANC. I was in exile. I was imprisoned, first in South African solitary confinement, imprisoned the second time, sleep deprivation, blown up in exile, lost an arm. So I'm very much identified by the absent part of me, the missing part of my right arm. I became a judge on the Constitutional Court. The document I'm most proud of actually was in exile, writing a code of conduct for the ANC, which forbade the use of torture in the revolutionary struggle. It was at a critical moment. It actually paved the way for future advances and was the foundation for our whole approach to a Bill of Rights and basing the new democracy we envisaged, not so much on structures of power, but on concepts of fundamental rights. As Halim has pointed out, our country has huge problems, a long way to go, but we got a country. And often tell people when I meet Palestinians, when we were in the struggle 30 so years ago, there were three great so-called problem areas in the world, all of which seemed to be intractable. There was Northern Ireland, there was Palestine, Israel, and South Africa. And South Africa seemed actually to be the most hopeless in terms of outcomes. After hundreds of years of forced dispossession, overt racial discrimination, leaders locked up, cultural divide, visible apartheid in the country. When we spoke about non-racial democracy, it seemed absolutely futile and hopeless. Nobody believed in it. And yet that became our breakthrough. And is relevant to the main themes that I want to touch on of the difference between rage and anger. Northern Ireland, 300 years of combat, they've got somewhere. And I mention that because situations that seem hopeless and intractable, made by human beings, can be resolved by human beings. And a certain how can I say, it's a political, psychological, cultural outlook, strategy, way of being was certainly fundamental in South Africa in enabling us to get, it was a bloody transition, but a relatively peaceful one, when the world was envisaging a racial war for the one side to win, the other had to die. We found strategies with very, very brilliant, wonderful leadership, not just by Nelson Mandela, but Oliver Tambo and a whole generation, and even our military people like Chris Hani, a deep thinker and a visionary. Now, I don't know, do I just stop at that? Or
Keep going, actually. I think you can tell us a little bit more about what provoked you to want to have this conversation. That would be great. And then
Yes.
we'll go back to Naila and Halima. So keep going.
Okay, so along my life, I've made certain discoveries which have been very helpful for me. I won't go into all of them now, but the 4 kinds of truth came out of the Truth Commission experience. Another discovery was the difference between warm knowledge and cold knowledge. Cold knowledge is traditional knowledge, exceptionally meaningful to lots of people, and I battled to regulate the two. Scientific knowledge is science. And then a recent one has been the difference between what I call rage and anger. And anger, to my mind, is an exceptionally important emotion, that people are not silent, don't suppress themselves, don't bow down to injustice and wrongdoing. And to be neutral in the face of wrongdoing is to allow the wrongdoing to continue. So anger is a source of transformation and change, and it's needed. You can be polite, you can be rude, you can even rage in the sense of, we go down the street and we're naughty and we don't obey the bylaws and so on. That's not the rage I'm speaking about. The rage is something that's a feeling and emotion that's so intense, that's so powerful. It's a feeling of hurt and injury, that the only way to assuage the rage is to exterminate, to eliminate the source of the pain. And so it becomes a question of competition for survival and for existence. And in an individual with that kind of rage, you become blind in your opposition, and the rage eats you up yourself because you can't achieve the outcome that you want. So in that sense, from being a positive force for change, anger, when that anger is so total, so subsuming, it becomes a destructive. And I see that distinction having considerable value in the Palestine-Israel situation, where the conflict is seen as one of such intensity and bitterness from the Israeli side. It's expressed as we are facing annihilation, and we have to exterminate the enemy. And the enemy is seen as a kind of vermin, and anything goes. And it's quite permissible to kill one Hamas leader to kill 200 Palestinians. That's rage, whether it's subjective emotion at that time or rage that is encapsulated in a political program, a military program. That's rage. And then the counter rage is fight back. And the only way we can get our dignity is to bring down and annihilate the state of Israel. Then in that kind of context, a two-state solution seems to be totally impossible. And the circles I move in, people believe in one state with equal rights for all. And I believe in that personally, as we have in South Africa. And I would love to see that. But I just don't see that as viable, feasible at all. And I don't see that as answering the claims of Palestinians who want a state that gives them the same dignity and security and place in the world that many Jews got from Israel. I've never been a Zionist. I don't regard myself as living in a diaspora. I happen to be a Jew. I'm living in South Africa. I'm a South African. That's not. I don't like a Lutheran state or a Christian state or a Muslim state or a Buddhist state. I think states should be secular with freedom of religion for people and so on. But history is not concerned with what Albie thinks and what Albie would like. And I've been personally very impressed by what an Arab Israeli couple who visited us about 2 years ago, spoke about one homeland, 2 states. And I've liked the idea of one homeland, which is almost a mythical, but a belonging kind of a thing of great significance. But the key to the 2 states is it's got to be a strong Palestinian state. And that's the part that's been missing from the equation. A subaltern state that is diminished and with an Israeli knee at its neck will never allow for dignity, for peace. And that's the paradox, that one day, hopefully, enough Israelis will understand that their secure future depends upon a strong Palestinian state, because they have shared interests in the Holy Land, shared interest in peace, in ending this endless war, shared interests in economy, in culture, in Semitic, Abrahamic background, whatever it might be, shared interests as neighbors should have. And once I think of that, I think now that's the kind of thinking that got us South Africa through our Freedom Charter, a different format, not a confederation with 2 states, 1 state, but it was thinking into the future, and it was using anger to bring down apartheid, but in a directed, productive way. And it meant a special way of approaching the whites. And in our ranks, the people would say, the enemy is not a race, the enemy is a system. There was one joke once upon a time about a young guy who's learning to say the right thing. And he knew he mustn't say the whites, so he would say the racists. And he was saying, and there's some good racists. What he really meant to say, we have some good compatriots. But, he couldn't quite get it. It was like a joke that went round. But it was so important because it meant instead of the whites being consolidated into a hegemonic bloc, feeling that the only way they can survive is through military force, suppression, domination, and a kind of white purity, suddenly they're discovering they can live comfortably and well with guarantees that come not from racial enclaves or anything of that kind, but through a Bill of Rights, through shared needs, through shared interests, and so on. We've got a long way to go in South Africa. We're not an equal society, a fair society. We're not a safe society, but we are an open society. We've got a country. And what, in that sense, Palestinians don't have is a country. And I can suddenly see now that vision of the anger directed at the everything going back from 70, 80 years now to the oppression, the exclusion, the ghastly, horrible bombing and starvation in Gaza and so on. That's got to be a source of anger, and it's an anger that should be reflected in a way. It's already had a huge impact in terms of world opinion. And I might be dreaming, but I see possibilities now of a strong Palestinian state emerging from the ruins, with strong Arab investment. And it's going to require very deep and skillful thought of doing it in a way that is seen as allowing for a strong Israel to exist into the future, but not on the basis of an oppressive state, a supremacist state that's constantly keeping Palestinians down, but a state that is willing to accept a neighbor that has equal strength, vitality, and energy that it has itself. And for me, that's anger working in a constructive way. Otherwise, it's just the war goes on forever. The strongest party militarily and economically remains the strongest party. There's no breakthrough. It requires it has strategic consequences. It means the kind of warfare you conduct is maybe of a different character. It doesn't involve suicide bombs, missiles, where the other side will always be stronger when it comes to brute force of that kind. And it also involves working very hard to find people in Israel itself that will see a future alongside Palestine, and to encourage splits and divisions as we did, as it turned out very successfully amongst the whites in South Africa. So these are the kind of thoughts that I've been having. They're kind of thoughts that might get me, to use a rude word, in the shit with everybody, because you please nobody. But we're not out to please. I mean, that doesn't matter. But just suddenly I feel a hopefulness inside I haven't felt for Israel-Palestine for a long, long time, that I can see that possibility. And it's all dependent on a strong Palestine being created, and that being accepted now by the world. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. We'll come back to you, Albie. Thank you so much for that. And you should get Naila. I'm going to throw it back at you before we go to open it up with a further comment from Believer. But I just don't know how you react to what Albie has just said.
I mean, I have a couple of reactions. I think, look, I don't share the same kind of hopefulness about what the outcome should be. But I do have a hopefulness. And, it may be directed differently. It may kind of look a little bit different. And I don't know that I can necessarily name why that I feel so differently about it, but I would say, one of the things that I've kind of felt over the last, I mean, again, remember that this is generational, right? So this is also kind of something that I'm born with and live with and have kind of felt in my being since I was born. So the perspective may be a little bit different, but particularly after the last 2 years, I would find it exceptionally difficult to be asked in any way to kind of accept coexistence with what we've seen, right? And I think that in a sense that could be that seems impossible to me, right? It seems impossible to me to ask people who have gone through what Palestinians have gone through in the last 78 years, but then more explicitly in the last 2 years, to accept any kind of coexistence with these, with this kind of monstrosity. I don't believe that there needs to be two states. I mean, that's just my kind of political opinion, and that that is what it is. But I also am. I'm not a pacifist, but I'm not genocidal, which and I don't necessarily have this kind of we need to burn everyone to the ground. But I do believe that there is a possibility of, look, to be very, I mean, I don't need to mince it, but essentially for me, whatever Palestine becomes, it needs to be safe for everyone who lives in it. That's the bottom line. That's the end of it. Like, I have no, I don't care what you call it. I don't care, how it comes to be that. I would really much prefer that it came to existence and came to be a state of safety and peace and dignity without murder and people being completely annihilated. But two states living side by side, I don't think is realistic. I don't think that's a realistic outcome. But then again, I'm willing to concede that that may be the only interim solution to sort of stop this kind of, this murder of people on any side. But obviously, I'm gonna speak more from the Palestinian side because that's disproportionately the larger victim in this kind of scenario. But ultimately, I don't think that there is a space for these two states to live side by side. But the other thing that I think is a little bit more kind of on the meta, realm of thinking through how this happens and how we can come to some kind of resolution on this is really looking at, again, the themes of what we have come to talk about today, which is around anger and agency, is looking at how does how do we turn this kind of anger and this rage that Albie is talking about that can be all consuming? How do you turn that into agency, right? How does that become a force for something that may be a little bit more productive and constructive? And, I mean, I've kind of been thinking about it in terms of I, I've never been uncomfortable with rage. I've never felt uncomfortable with very extreme emotions. I think, at some point, maybe in my early kind of adolescence, I might have not been able to regulate it very well and kind of not know how to name it. But as you get older, I mean, I think you kind of develop tools for how you can compartmentalize what your rage and your anger and the difference between what Albie's talking about, rage and anger, and how those two things can be distinctly different. So you learn to accommodate it a little bit better, and maybe articulate it a little bit better and more clearly. But how do you take this kind of all-consuming rage and turn it into something that can be a force for some hope and some optimism? And I guess, one of the things is really to be able to name whatever that harm is without any apology, right? And this is really, I mean, even for me as a complete, fully grown adult, is something that's taken time to learn to do. We filter ourselves. Again, like I said, in my 20s, I moved to New York. I moved to a place that, had a big population of people who probably felt quite differently than I did about what Palestine means and what Israel means. And I was apologetic. I would whisper my Palestinianness in many ways, whether it was in how I, introduced myself, in how I expressed what I thought about being Palestinian and coming into a society that had a lot of Jews whose opinion on this I didn't necessarily know at the outset, and couldn't assume. So I've learned that piece of it, which is really to be able to name the harm without any kind of apology, and this power in calling things what they are. And I'll be honest, I mean, Halima is someone who has kind of helped with that for me, frankly. One of the things that Halima and I did together, which was this huge, big public resignation from Alliance Magazine, came from a series of conversations over the course of about 6 to 8 months, and talking about like solidarity and what does it look like to be in solidarity with each other. And she was very kind of explicit, like there is no need to apologize or to kind of make excuses for what you're feeling. You can name it, and it doesn't have to carry the burden of being offensive or rude because it is what it is. It has to live in its essence, and then it takes on whatever life it needs to take on to propel you forward. So that was one thing. And the other thing is kind of something I think I've, lived with my whole life, but again, being able to name it, which is reclaiming kind of authorship of your stories and your narratives. And we know that narratives are shaped mostly by those who control the resources and who are able to control the outcomes. And we know that, whoever defines the problem is ultimately who gets to define the solution. And so narrative sovereignty can translate into political sovereignty. And it can translate eventually into agency. And then the other thing is, I guess, a little bit to Albie's point, which is around, the building of collective power and not necessarily heroic individualism. So, agency is ultimately sustained through community and built through community. Movements, alliances, the infrastructures of care, the infrastructures of spaces of solidarity. And so again, that's where kind of, having comrades in arms, or comrades in theory together with you, and why it's been so important to have that kind of community. And I think maybe that's where we've seen the building of some momentum around what could be hopeful, is that we're starting to define a little bit more clearly and a little bit more productively what solidarity looks like, right? And that's another thing that I also got from Halima. And I mean, I'm pinning a lot on Halima, no pressure intended, but just to say that it was such an explicit kind of example for me of what it looks like to call on people when you want that kind of solidarity. And so I'll give one example and then I'll stop. Early on in all of this, when we were first starting, Halima and I, to talk about what we wanted to do about our role on the Alliance Magazine editorial board, there was a request to have a conversation with someone at Alliance. And I had already had a conversation with that person and just wasn't really, I just couldn't go through it again. And I felt really burdened with, like, I just don't want to go through this, even though it seemed like something so silly and so small. And I remember having this conversation with Halima in Zimbabwe. Actually, I remember exactly where we were. We were walking on the airport on the tarmac to our flight to Johannesburg. And I kind of got a little bit teary. And at one point I was like, yeah, Halima, I know I need to have this conversation, but I honestly just can't. And at one point, Halima just said, "Oh my God, you know what? Actually, no, stop. Of course not. You don't have to have this conversation. I'll have that conversation." And she kind of like was, she in real time said that solidarity is like, I need to I'll take this from you, I will carry this from you, and I will have this conversation on your behalf, and then I'll come back to you and kind of we can talk about what. And it was something so simple and so small but so meaningful, because if it had been left to me, we would not have had this I wouldn't have been able to continue because I wasn't willing to have that confrontation anymore. And so it's that, looking at, that's what's giving me some hope, is that there have been ways that we've evolved into what it looks like to be an ally, what it looks like to empower someone's anger into something that might be a little bit more productive. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Naila. That's so powerful. As you were speaking, I'm sorry to do this to you, Halima. One of the things, as you were speaking, I was thinking, wow, one of the things that I have been most impacted on in the last few weeks and months is something we haven't yet talked about in this conversation. And it's essentially the callousness and the ability to look away, which I think is a part of this. That's where at least much of my anger is. It's at the ability for people to just pretend it's not happening. And I wonder, Halima, because you've been very helpful in helping me understand that. Maybe you could weave that into some of your reaction to this. I'll stop.
Thanks, Jerry. So many things to have been popping in my head to talk about. And Naila, I was glad you started with the issue of resilience, and something that I've had it's a red button for me for a long time, because it means to me, it's a way of putting the onus of change on the people who are being oppressed rather than on the system that's oppressing them. And the way in which we have used resilience in our philanthropy sector, in our development sector, as this great thing without examining the contradictions. And so I've been very deliberately, when I've been talking about the issue of resilience, or trying not to talk about resilience, I've been talking about resistance. And what does that mean? And I'm just somebody, if you know me, language matters, and the implications of our words matter, right? So what does it mean to talk about resistance rather than resilience? And what does it mean to talk about resistance against the system? So it's not individualized, but it is collectivized. And so we've been having conversations, me, Naila, with Jerry, with Albie, with Tamsin, and Naila and I have been talking a lot. And when we talk about resistance, so over the last couple of years, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, COVID, the genocide, there's this theme I keep seeing on social media, which says, what radicalized you, right? And then you get all of these responses, and it's about understanding and seeing the world differently, recognizing the inequalities. You traveled somewhere, something happened, and you suddenly saw what systems were at play, and it's opened your eyes in a way. But it's again one of those buttons that gets pushed for me, because I understand the sentiment behind it, but it's so problematic because it makes standing for equality, truth, and justice seem radical when that should be the norm. And so, Jerry, when you say we're not, how do we have this ability to look away? I ask, are we angry enough? Do we need to be enraged? And I'm convinced we can find ways to channel the rage, because I see many people who are uncomfortable, it's discomfort, and I see many people who are angry and they can still dissociate and look away. And I keep asking myself, what does it mean to ground ourselves in the reality of this world that we are living in, so that we do not look away? And we were on a planning call the other day, we were talking about how this complete dystopia, right? That You're seeing people being murdered, live stream right in front of you, you're seeing it. And then you take part in whatever it is that you take part in, and you know you have to protest this, and you know that it's not going to make a whit of a difference in the shorter scheme of things, right? Maybe in the longer scheme, but not in the shorter scheme. And then you, at some point, shut down and you go do school runs and you go do kids' birthdays and you do holidays because you need a break. And then you have to remind yourself, well, actually, I can get a break. And the people we're talking about can't, right? And then it brings you back. But to go back to this issue of what radicalized you, it does two things. One, it says to us that resistance to the status quo is an extreme act. That if you actually engage in true resistance, that's very extreme. You know, it makes the comfortable, radicalization comfortable. It makes it the small tweaks. It makes being grounded in living your values radical. It makes refusing to legitimate spaces that are complicit radical. Naila and I have been called radical for resigning from the Alliance Board. I don't think that was a radical act to do. I just think it was the right thing to do. You know, and so I think we need to start changing the conversations we have. But most importantly, when we make the norm seem radical, then true radical transformation becomes far beyond our imagination. It becomes far beyond the possibility of what's an acceptable conversation to voice, to explore, to support. And I think that, for me, is the big conversation that we need to be having. So, you know, Jerry, what was so the ability to look away. I mean, I think I talked to that. I think that it's easy, and I come from the philanthropic sector. I've been in this space all of my life, and it's been heartbreaking. It's been absolutely heartbreaking to see colleagues I know, I love, I have stood with, look away, be indifferent, be neutral, suddenly say, oh, well, what about? It has been a very revealing process, a very depressing, heartbreaking process. And so I don't understand the ability to look away. I don't understand. And so, Jerry, I don't have any answers for that, except that we're convincing ourselves that by doing the small things and by normalizing the minor actions, that those are radical, that we are part of a system of change. And we're absolving ourselves of our complicity in this space. And do I think that there's space for change within our philanthropic sector? Yes, hell yes. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. But I do think that we have a big conversation around complicity and what does transformation look like that needs to happen. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to you, Halima. That's really powerful stuff. I'm ready to open this to the floor in a minute. I just want to make sure that Albie doesn't have something he wants to say before we do that. And then after that, I'll open it up. Albie?
Yes. In fact, I'm being the radical here. It would be much easier to go along. I agree with everything I've been through it. I've seen it. I've felt it. And I've always been proud to be called a radical. And it's right on. I'm coming at the whole issue from a kind of different point of view. And it's a combination of a strategy of struggle and a psychology, if you like. And it seemed impossible in Northern Ireland after 300 years. The Catholics and the Protestants were killing each other. They were marching. The bitterness was so intense that the idea that they could share government just seemed impossible. After World War II, there was so much anti-Japanese anger and hatred in America, the Japs. It seemed impossible that Japanese and Americans could work together, not just do trade together, but do things together in meaningful ways. Germany and France had 3 military occupations of France. The Boche, Romain Rolland wrote a book where he made his French hero Germain and his German hero was Franz. It seemed impossible those countries could coexist and live together. In South Africa, the vicious racism, so intense in every home, on the pavements, in the streets, it seemed impossible that black and white. I was just watching our rugby team the other day with black players and white players hugging each other and the people in the stand. That seemed, are you crazy? Are you really imagining it? So, Naila, it's cheeky of me. You don't tell people in struggle how they should conduct their struggle. You don't tell them we hated it. You don't tell them what emotions they should have. I'm just saying now that what seemed impossible could be possible. And it could be huge for Palestine. Imagine having a powerful state with your education systems, with your culture, not subversive culture, struggling to exist, a little olive tree growing here or there. It could be huge. And it actually makes sense. You know, no war makes sense. War is always ugly. Human beings should never be like killing each other. I'm not making this simply as a moral kind of a point. So it requires an act of imagination, and it's not going to come about from one day to the next. It would have to be stage, 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 but in that direction. And for me, what gives me real hope in imagining it is the idea of a strong state with powerful Arab support, and where you don't have to rely on bombs and missiles and so on to have a place on earth. You've got your country. That's really the what I'm feeding into the conversation, and I wouldn't want it to be seen as a soft option to the hard struggle, to the grind, to overcoming the Islamophobia and the malignity that's so powerful. It's not that at all. That's really my kind of and you know, my body often knows before my mind if something could work in all sorts of ways. And I don't know, suddenly things are clicking inside me. It's not just optimism for the sake of optimism. That there could be a way forward, and that would require huge introspection on the Israeli side, huge, and the same emotion that you have now, yours, and I would say historically grounded with much more to justify and favor it, but a similar emotion on the other side of the impossible becoming the possible.
Thank you for that. I think actually the idea of how do we absorb, if you like, the potential of what's happening is critical here. And one of the things that I think I'm hearing you say, Albie, that I think probably needs amplification is we have to be really careful at this pivotal moment that the facile uh, solutions aren't the ones that are brought to play. And this sort of deeper, harder thinking, longer term embrace of perhaps a different vision needs to start. And therefore, we need to recruit people who think differently and who aren't going to try and turn Gaza into a Riviera for tourists. So I think that's really something really important. I'm opening this to the floor. I see there are some very powerful comments. Please keep the comments coming. You'll all be getting a copy of all of this. But anybody wants to put their hand up and react? Join the conversation. We're not talking at you, we're talking with you. Do you want me to start calling people out?
Can I just raise Susie's question, because I think it speaks to what Halima mentioned and well, everybody, but actually as a question for how one moves.
Go, Tamsin, go.
Susie, you carry on.
Sorry, having to get off my my mute. So the question was simply about agency. What you actually all mean by that, because I assume that you have as varied an understanding of that as you have of anger and the power of it, and I would just love to hear you speak to it. You know, and I just want to say I really, really appreciate all three of your perspectives and the depth of it and the wisdom. So thank you.
You want to tell us what agency is, Naila?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this context, for me, it's even in this conversation, it's having being allowed to say, okay, that, this perspective sounds really great, but then I also can, I don't have to be polite about it. I don't have to accept it if I don't agree with it, but also that disagreement doesn't immediately mean that, I'm the proponent of the exact opposite of it. Like, it doesn't have to be completely polarizing. And I think that for me, that would define a kind of agency, because it also it takes away the I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but like the extreme. It takes away the extreme. So being allowed to live in kind of this middle space, right? One of the reactions I'm having when Albie's talking about what it would take to build a strong and kind of sustainable Palestinian state would be the support of other strong Arab states. That's not happening. That's not happening. The reality is that's not happening. If anything, I mean, we've seen the strong and economically powerful Arab states be more Zionist than the Zionists. I mean, it's astonishing. They're not coming to save us, and they're not coming to support Palestinians. And those who maybe from within are able to, their people, their communities, their societies, able to, have zero political will to do it. So I don't think the Arab states are going to help build a strong Palestinian state in the next, in this kind of foreseeable future. So I've thought a lot about, like, okay, so what would it take? What would it take for us to be able, as a people, to be able to say, okay, I have the agency to look for who my allies are as well, right? Is that I don't have to be beholden to the first person who comes and says, I'm going to support you. And that it's an interesting thing, again, is like, in this process, a lot of us have been confused by some of the people who, at one point we thought Tucker Carlson was like the devil incarnate. And then all of a sudden he says one thing that may potentially sound, pro-Palestinian. Everyone's like, oh my God, Tucker's on our side. I'm like, actually, no, these people are not on your side. Like, you need to think a little bit more. You need to have a bit more of a nuanced understanding of what allyship looks like and what solidarity really means. And just because all of a sudden somebody has turned into a complete raging anti-Semite doesn't actually mean that support is something that's gonna help you. And so I would say the same thing about, like, again, agency for me is being allowed to say that, being allowed to say, no, I don't have to beg for just anybody's solidarity. I don't have to beg for just anybody's support. But that support has to come in a way that's meaningful, that's intentional, and that actually is empowering, that allows me, and I mean, I'm using me as kind of the symbol for the entire Palestinian people, but enables us to live fully in what that looks like. We get to decide, those of us in the diaspora, those of us who actually live there, more so those who live there. I'll tell you right now, if tomorrow, 60% of Palestinians living across the various different parts that make up Palestine, legitimately, I mean, all of it legitimately is Palestine, but whatever, you know what I mean, said, we actually are fine with two states, like, just stay, just leave us alone. We'll figure this out. I would support that. It's not my place. I don't live there. I don't have to deal with the daily reality of what it looks like to have absolutely everything, including your agency, stripped away from you. So I will support whatever it is that helps people live in some kind of dignity. So yeah, I mean, I think that's enough, because obviously we can go on forever.
Yeah, it's a complicated thing. Halima, before I go to Albie, what's agency for you?
So I've been thinking a lot about agency for a long time, and we boil down to it's simple. It's the ability to make the decisions that affect your own lives, right? And that's agency for me. And I don't think that we give people agency. I don't think it's ours to give. But I do think that we hinder people from expressing their agency, from realizing their agency. And we have to sometimes just bloody get out of the way, right? When we think we're doing good, actually, many times we're not. So, agency in this kind of context is being able to also, it goes down to basic things like, what's the narrative that's upholding the kind of visions that we're talking about? So what does it mean to have a narrative, not on security, but on justice? What does it mean for a one Palestine, a single state based on justice, not on security, for that narrative to shape and think about what does a solution to this look like? What does it mean for us to talk about not just peace, but justice? And I think so. Agency means many things, but how do we create the spaces for those who are being oppressed, for people in Palestine to be able to make the decisions that they think need to happen? Forget about what everybody else thinks. It's not about making somebody else feel secure. Let me just say this. It's not. Somebody asked me the other day, and I live in South Africa, right? I can wear kufiya anytime. Nothing happens. My mom is in niqab. She can wear purda anyway, and nobody bats an eyelid, right? We have a very free society. And somebody who is not from South Africa, goes to my son's school, said to me the other day, I love your kufiya. I love that you wear it at every function. But don't you think it makes people uncomfortable? And I thought about it, and I said, I don't care. Honestly, I don't care. Because if you're uncomfortable at me wearing a symbol that says we want equality and justice for everybody, then that's a you problem, not a me problem. Right? So I do think that agencies to be able to have the conversations that we think we need to be having, for Palestinians to be able to raise those conversations without being saying, hey, you're going too far away from what the conversations we think you should be having. And that, I think, is our big disjuncture.
Very, very powerful. Thank you. Albie, for you.
Yes, I'm thinking now with my hat, the struggle hat, and of our leadership and people like Oliver Tambo. And he would accept the idea that African states are colluding with South Africa. There were many African states that were colluding with Africa, but he worked harder in Africa than anywhere else. And the Arab masses, if one can speak like that, the Arab intelligentsia, they would love to see. And, they've been wounded by what's happened recently. It's been an insult not just to Palestinian people. It's an insult to people who belong to that part of the world, to see the impunity with which their brothers and sisters have been treated. And that's kind of huge. And in a weird way, there are big contracts to be had here. There's a lot of money to be made. Now, should the money go to American contractors, or should it be to Turkish contractors? And we would never accept that our African brothers and sisters were on the side of the enemy. At times, they were even spying for Pretoria. From Kenya, the Attorney General would fly to Pretoria we had, I don't want to go through other names and so on, but it was vital for our cause, the international movement. And it wasn't just a solidarity movement, because it involved divestment, it involved limitation of arms, it had all sorts of other consequences. So immediately I'd be thinking of, now what strategy, vision can we direct towards decent-minded people in the Arab countries? What kind of vision can we give them so that they're not just beholden to their leaders? And something that if you say to our leaders, build up a new Palestine from the ruins, it would have huge traction. And it's not even in that sense, how can we take on Israel? Because now this will be a Palestinian territory with a new kind of genesis. Anyway, I'd be thinking along those lines. And I think that could alter the whole equation. I hope I'm right, and I'm sure you hope I'm right. You feel very let down with totally understandable reasons, in face of this horror that there hasn't been more support. But the sense I get is there's been a very significant, I've never used the word tectonic in debate before, but tectonic shift in terms of international opinion with regard to Palestine, Israel. And possibilities exist now that didn't exist before. So it's my inner body, if you like, telling my brain that the struggle should be much wider. People like yourselves have a totally understandable, intense struggle for your own survival in dignity with a sense of worth. And it's wonderful and beautiful to hear you speak. That, you don't have to feel all the time that you kowtowing to sensibilities of others and you mustn't rock the boat. Your very pride speaks for, and dignity and forcefulness speaks for the cause that you want. So I wouldn't say, now, Naila, don't spoil the chances of getting a two-state solution, with your pessimism about it. I'd say right on, that's who you are. That's what you feel, that's where you are. But I'm maybe asking just to maybe have a little tiny portal in your head for ongoing events over a period of time with strategies. And I think you've actually pushed me into a very important dimension I hadn't thought of before. The people in Egypt, in Cairo, in Baghdad, becoming allies of a strong independent state. And then couple that with the profit motive of business people now being involved and also getting a certain pride, international pride, that we are helping to rebuild. I really feel propitious circumstances exist for something that seemed totally impossible before.
Well, I have to say, I am hopeful that you're going to convince all of us that this is the right moment. And one of the things would be really interesting would be to try and make sure that the worst things that can happen, in the interregnum, if you like, Gramsci used to say that in the interregnum, morbid things happen. And so if this is an interregnum, what can happen that's positive, and how do we keep the wrong things from happening to perpetuate the kind of context we're in? And I think I take from what you've said that there is maybe a glimmer of light. Maybe we need to figure out how to build it. But I'm going
Can I
to
just add one last little thing? Sorry.
go
If
ahead.
these ideas are coming to me, I can also see massive employment of Palestinians in the reconstruction, in building, in quantity surveying, in feeding, in education, and that becomes the beginning of a new state. So you're not just thinking about who are the top leaders, who are the army, who are the police. You're thinking who are the constructors. It's a moment. Let me put it this way. It's a possibility it's possible now. And I would urge people to focus a lot of attention on that and make strong demands on that. It's intolerable that Arab states don't do these things. And I'm sure the majority of the people there would feel that. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Jerry,
you.
can I say something around context?
Go ahead.
So two things. Whenever I feel really, I'm hopeful, but I also feel really depressed. And I'm part of something called the Doye, which is Women in African Philanthropy. Naila sits with me on the steering committee, and Theo, especially one of our colleagues, always reminds us that this rupture, what is being called this moment, is not new in the Global South. That we in the Global South have been on the back end of these ruptures over and over and over again. That this rupture and the implications of this rupture is now being felt in the Global North is what is new. And so we have weathered this before, and we will figure out how to weather it again. So that's one thing about the context. Two, we've spent most of this conversation talking about Palestine, but the solution isn't just about Palestine, because we focus so much on Palestine as a lens through which to see what are the inequalities that are driving, the systemic inequalities that are driving what we're seeing globally, what we're seeing in Congo, what we're seeing in Sudan, what we're seeing in Haiti, what we're seeing in so many other places. And so as much as we want to just focus on a solution that is just about Palestine and Israel, that is only going to get us so far, because I don't think we will get a solution to Israel and Palestine without addressing the very deep-seated problematics of how the world works around colonialism, the imperialism, all of that still exists and that is shaping our world and that is allowing the power structures to stay in place. I don't think that unless we're talking about that, will we ever get a truly free Palestine.
Talk about raising the ante. Thank you. Very, very powerful. Naila, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was gonna, I was gonna say something again about kind of this power of people, the community kind of power of moving paradigms and shifting paradigms and something. So let me lay the context here for where this comment is coming from. Earlier this month, or last month, which is too early this month, but late last month, I was at the Impact Europe conference in Malmo in Sweden. And so I made a joke, and I know I talked to you guys about this when we had our prep call around this, but it was my first time to be in Scandinavia, and the first time that I actually attended a conference that I had no role in other than just to attend, right? So I mean, it's been years since I've done that. And I was invited as part of the delegation with an organization called Build Palestine, which is literally what it is. It's in the name. It's a group of social enterprises and other kind of socially motivated organizations that are looking to rebuild Palestine and to build Palestine. And so one thing on the kind of jokey side of this is that I was excited about going to Scandinavia for the first time and really had, these dreams of I'm finally going to try to eat some kind of, Scandinavian food that I hadn't had before, and went to the conference, and every single day of the conference, they fed us Lebanese food. And I was so annoyed by this because I was like, I didn't come all the way to Sweden to eat falafel, which I can eat every single day anywhere that, where I live. And then ultimately, another member of the delegation with me was a guy the man who runs Ta'awun, which is one of the largest Palestinian organizations, also goes by the name the Welfare Association, and he happens to have a home in Malmo. And his wife, who's also Palestinian, they both live in Malmo half the year, and so they invited us over to their house. So my colleagues on the Build Palestine delegation went to Tariq and his wife's house for dinner a Palestinian couple, and was the only evening where we had Swedish food. So I just, for me, just that alone kind of was like the absurdity of this situation. But anyway, the other part of it, which is a little bit more jarring, is I felt a little bit out of place at this conference. We were maybe all in all, out of about 300 and something people, I think all told, we might have been 12 Arabs. Most of us coming as part of this delegation or partners of this delegation. And so, my role was a little bit kind of, I represent AFF, the Arab Foundations Forum, but then also I had been invited on as part of the delegation. So I was there to kind of amplify and talk about the work that they're doing. And I see Remy in the comments was saying they're fantastic. Follow them if you aren't already. And that's absolutely true. They are an incredible organization, Build Palestine. And we're also kind of in conversations around how to create an offshoot of Impact Europe into an Arab Impact Network, right? So we were kind of talking with other partners around that. So it was a little bit uncomfortable because every time we would confront someone and introduce ourselves and sort of say, have you heard of Build Palestine? Let me tell you a little bit about what they do. And almost exclusively, not 100%, but almost exclusively, the response that we would get was some mixture of discomfort, because we kept saying build Palestine, it's to build Palestinian society, it's to help empower Palestinian youth, it's to help empower Palestinian business. And I don't know if people are just uncomfortable saying the word Palestine without having to say Palestine, Israel, or without having to say the Palestinian conflict, or without, no, really, like, I don't know if that's what the issue is, but we just kept saying it, and inevitably at the end of each conversation, someone would have to offer us an opinion on how, have you thought of reaching out to XYZ organization? And it would, almost every time be an organization that works on building bridges or talking to both sides. And every time I was just like this is not the point of what we're trying. I mean, I'm not here to talk about like how I can talk to, Jewish groups about being helpful in the rebuilding of, like, just stop. One guy in a conversation also asked me if in the Arab region we had considered, I'm sorry, if we had considered the concept of establishing endowments. And like, yeah.
Oh,
So you
that's
see why.
fantastic, given that this comes from Northern
Indeed.
Africa.
Indeed. So I laughed, but also very bitterly so. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. Are you asking me if Arabs have considered what it would look like to build an endowment? And then I said, just a fun fact. But yeah, I mean, as you know, Jerry, like the first ever recorded act of philanthropy ever was an endowment that was recorded in Fez, Morocco in 859 AD by a Moroccan woman, which is the endowment of the University of Qarawiyyin, which is a university that is still active to this day. So it's a little bit jarring to be put in these spaces where people are kind of like, have you considered maybe if you could be a little bit? It's like, it's the equivalent of telling a woman, have you considered smiling a little bit more? And it was just such an odd. And then the pinnacle for me was this: one of the colleagues I was with attended a session that interestingly was kind of set up as a session to discuss so this is an impact investing conference. And so it was a session to talk about how impact investing in the philanthropy space has helped in defense. So essentially in like the war machinery, and how it has kind of helped to make the world a safer place. So again, I mean, at face value, kind of a ludicrous proposition, but okay. And so my colleague went to this event and listened to a panel of people talk about how, impact investing in defense supported Ukraine to become a little bit more, I don't know, independent. I don't know honestly, I'm not really sure what they were trying to do. And at the end of it, she raised her hand and said, I'd like to just kind of address, I haven't heard a single one of you on this panel talk about the current like active genocide that we've been watching over the last 2 years, and what that has, and of course, so there was like all the air was sucked out of the room, complete silence, absolute crickets. And then at one point, a Ukrainian panelist on the panel said, she knew that this woman worked for Build Palestine, and she said, I don't know that we should kind of engage with this question because I think she's a little too close to the problem. So when we talk about agency and what that sounds like and how you can take anger and how you're supposed to, I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. Like, I don't know what you're supposed to do with someone who has the audacity to call out a very legitimate question, right? Like, truly explain to me in the context of what we're talking about, how on earth you think that impact investing in defense has made the world a safer place. Because this woman was literally saying, like, I'm looking at this from the perspective of Palestine. And again, not that Palestine is the only issue. And by the way, this woman is not even Palestinian. But this is a cause that's very kind of near to her. And she said, I don't understand how you're able to say those words with a straight face and then continue to have a panel to talk about. And she said, because frankly, over the last 2 years, I've never, ever felt less safe. And so I'm curious about that. We seem to live on in very parallel universes. And I just thought, to me, that was such an interesting it was an interesting experience to feel so incredibly out of place, but then also to feel completely unheard at every single juncture. So we're having networking conversations and you're talking about this wonderful initiative, and people are almost instinctively wanting to reframe what that sounds like and what it should be. And I'm talking about empowerment of an entire population that's been going through a genocide, and someone wants to be like, yeah, but have you considered if you also channeled some of this into talking about peace building with the other side? It just felt like this constant, we're up against. And I think in the context of this conversation as well, it feels like the divide is still a little bit, there's a bit of a chasm that needs, I don't know, some redirection, some continued conversations. I don't think these are conversations that can be, wrapped up in a pretty little bow and be like, okay, well, we had an hour and a half about this, so what are we going to do next? Like, I really think this is a continuous, it's a continuous conversation. It's a continuous struggle, I guess, right? And a calling out every single time. And I think another thing, last point, the continuous calling out also makes me uncomfortable, right? Because it's again a burden that gets placed on us to like constantly have to stand up and be like, I'm sorry, but actually, can you not say these things? Can you not? Because then you get the perception is that you have a knee-jerk reaction, or you're too sensitive, or as in the case of this woman who stood up, could you sit down because maybe you're a little too close to the problem. So I don't know if that addresses anything, but it's just sort of what I was thinking about.
Well, I think what you're saying is something that we should all take cognizance of. So I'm going to try and articulate some of it in a different way. I mean, it sounds to me as if everybody agrees we need to do some serious thinking and talking ongoing. We accept that we don't all agree. And we must be clear, I think, that one of the things that the context is changing. It has to change because we believe in change. And therefore, the question is, how are we going to be best placed to take advantage of change if it happens? But it doesn't mean, if you like, apologizing. And I think I take this point very much from you, Naila and Halima. It's not about apologizing for where you're coming from, because that's where you're coming from. That's the reality you're dealing with all the time. So I think we have to create more space for us to have these very uncomfortable conversations. And I don't think anybody is telling anybody else how to absorb this. It's a question of, can we be honest with each other and say all of this needs absorption, and we need to have somehow the will to continue to keep talking. And Tamsin and I have been, over the last couple of weeks, talking a lot about the fact that I wake up pretty disillusioned about things all the time. And I'm not always sure that these conversations that we've been having, and this is, by the way, the 15th one we've had this year. It's the last one of the year. So maybe this is a good time. And I keep throwing up, do we continue having these conversations? Do they make a difference? Are we building, a constituency of people that feel strongly enough about some things to move on? And do we find each other in these conversations? And it's not about getting everybody to be reading things from exactly the same page, but it's also looking for, well, it's actually a recognition of how bloody impotent each one of us is. And if we're impotent, then we really need to seek out others. And that's what this is about. But anyway, all I'm trying to say, I think, is that this is not easily wrapped up in any one conversation, and an hour and a half is no way does justice to the depth of feeling and the things that are being discussed. I'm reminded, Albie, of a conversation you had with Steve Pittam some years back, which I was lucky enough to listen to, and it was really about Northern Ireland. So given that you've talked about Northern Ireland, I'll just remind you. And it was very much about how impossible things seemed at times. And I think you said this both about South Africa and Northern Ireland. And maybe we all have to take some solace. And I'm with Halima on saying this is much bigger than Palestine. It's the way the world sees the world, the looking away from Palestine to look at Ukraine, the looking away from Sudan to look at Palestine, the ability of mankind to keep looking away is staggering, right? We're good at this. This is something we're actually quite proficient at. And the idea I think you came with is to say things look impossible. And let me go back to Bob Dylan. He's my favorite person. He says the darkest hour is just before the dawn. Maybe sometimes things are really bleak, and that forces us to be a bit more like bricoleurs in thinking through things in different ways. So the question is, given that there is a problem to solve, or a crisis that's at hand, how do we bring a new lens, a new frame, a new scaffolding so that we're actually able to make more progress? And I think that's where this conversation's taking us. But clearly we need much more time, and we need powerful spokespeople like Halima and Naila to keep opening themselves up to this very difficult conversation. And Naila, can I say, I know it's tough, but we really do need you to keep saying, no, it's my right to say this, right? And I don't know how else to say it without sounding in some way patronizing, but we need your voices. Otherwise, we're not going to be on the straight and narrow. So please keep la lotta continua. This is something, this is what it is. It's a long-term thing. It's not going to be solved in 5 minutes. Any more questions or comments? I know that Tamsin wanted me to remind you all that this is the last conversation this year, and help us make a decision about whether this stuff is worth continuing or we should just bring it to some kind of graceful conclusion. And you need to tell us this, because there are days when I really don't have the energy to keep doing it, and I don't think Tamsin does. So a lot of work goes into it. Please help us think through whether it's worth doing. It's the 15th. You'll get the video. You'll get the notes. I don't know what else to say. Tamsin, you want to come in?
I'm definitely not with Jerry in not doing this. So, but I do agree with him that it's very hard sometimes when who you get in the room are everybody's AI note takers, but not the people. And kind of Jerry and I think, oh gosh, but this has been an amazing conversation, and I'm very grateful for your response to Naila's earlier one in the year, and Halima, that you stepped into this. I think there are a lot of unfinished threads in this conversation. So I do normally do the notes after the conversations, which I do share with everybody who's registered. And hopefully that will evoke even a follow-up conversation, which I'm eyeing you, Halima, already, because you seem to have opened up a lot of that at the end there, and Naila and Albie, your thoughts would be great. But thank you very much, and thank you, Jerry. Albie, Naila, and Halima, very grateful. And thanks to all of you who have joined, so many this year, and to those who are new, you can sign. Well, you will now be on the list until you unsubscribe, and you'll get the notes because you're registered. And I wish you a good time between years. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you so much, everybody,
on this, and thank you for doing this, all of you. Albie, thank you. I'm sorry you were late, but it was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Halima. Thank you, Naila. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thank you so much.